December 15th, 1944. The snow fell thick across the Belgian countryside near Malmedy, creating a deceptive blanket of peace over what would become one of the most harrowing episodes of the European conflict. Private First Class Samuel Washington knelt beside his foxhole at 0500 hours, his weathered hands clasped in prayer as the temperature plummeted to -12 degrees Celsius. His fellow soldiers of the 761st Tank Battalion watched with a mixture of amusement and scorn as Samuel whispered his morning devotions, the same ritual he had maintained every single day for the past 18 months of service. They believed their superior firepower and tactical position would guarantee another routine patrol through enemy territory. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. It really helps support the channel. What none of them realized was that Samuel's unwavering faith would prove to be the difference between survival and catastrophe, as the events of that morning would transform him from the most ridiculed member of his unit into the sole reason any of them would live to see another Christmas. The 761st Tank Battalion had been operating in the Ardennes region for 3 weeks, part of the larger Allied forces maintaining pressure along the German defensive lines. The unit consisted of 47 men spread across 12 Sherman tanks, each weighing 32 tons and equipped with 75mm guns capable of penetrating most German armor at distances up to 1,000 meters. Their commanding officer, Captain Harold Morrison from Detroit, Michigan, had served with distinction since the Normandy landings and possessed the confident bearing of a man who had never experienced a significant defeat. Samuel Washington represented something of an anomaly within the 761st. Born in rural Alabama in 1922, he had volunteered for service immediately following the attack on Pearl Harbor, despite the segregated nature of the military and the limited roles available to soldiers of his background. His assignment to an integrated tank unit marked one of the military's experimental programs designed to test the effectiveness of mixed-race combat formations. Standing 6 feet 2 inches tall with shoulders broadened by years of farm work, Samuel possessed the physical strength necessary for tank operations, but it was his unshakable religious conviction that set him apart from his fellow soldiers. Every morning at precisely 0500 hours, Samuel would emerge from his sleeping quarters or foxhole and spend exactly 15 minutes in prayer. He would kneel facing east, regardless of weather conditions, enemy proximity, or the ribbing from his squad mates. His devotions included passages from the 23rd Psalm, the Lord's Prayer, and personal supplications for the safety of his unit, his family back home, and even for the souls of enemy soldiers they might encounter during combat operations. Sergeant Bobby O'Brien from Boston had made Samuel's prayer routine a source of constant entertainment for the unit. O'Brien, a veteran of the North African campaign, possessed the sharp wit and cynical outlook common among soldiers who had witnessed the arbitrary nature of conflict. He would often organize impromptu betting pools on whether Samuel would maintain his schedule during artillery bombardments or enemy contact. The running joke involved awarding Samuel increasingly ridiculous military decorations for outstanding devotion to divine communication or meritorious service in the field of supernatural logistics. Private Tommy Chen, the unit's radio operator, frequently mimicked Samuel's prayer posture during equipment checks, exaggerating the solemn expressions and hand gestures while the other soldiers erupted in laughter. Chen had immigrated from China in 1938 and possessed limited English vocabulary, but his physical comedy transcended language barriers and provided relief from the constant tension of combat operations. The most vocal critic of Samuel's religious practices was Corporal James Kowalski from Chicago, whose family had immigrated from Poland in the early 1900s. Kowalski had witnessed the devastation wrought by German forces in his ancestral homeland and maintained that prayer represented a waste of energy, better devoted to weapons maintenance, tactical preparation, or simple rest. He would often lecture Samuel about the superiority of practical action over spiritual contemplation, citing statistics about ammunition effectiveness, armor penetration capabilities, and casualty rates to support his arguments. Despite the constant mockery and criticism, Samuel never wavered in his routine or responded with anger to his tormentors. His typical response involved a gentle smile and the quiet observation that everyone possessed different methods of preparing for whatever challenges lay ahead. When pressed to explain the logic behind his devotions, Samuel would simply state that prayer provided him with peace, clarity, and the strength necessary to perform his duties effectively. His refusal to abandon his practices or engage in arguments only intensified the ridicule from certain members of the unit. The morning of December 15th began like countless others for the 761st Tank Battalion. Intelligence reports indicated minimal enemy activity in their assigned sector, with German forces apparently conducting a general withdrawal toward more defensible positions closer to their homeland. The battalion's mission involved a standard reconnaissance patrol along the primary road network connecting Malmedy to the smaller villages scattered throughout the region. Their orders specified maintaining contact with enemy rearguard elements while avoiding decisive engagement, gathering intelligence about German troop movements and defensive preparations. Captain Morrison conducted the pre-mission briefing at 0430 hours, outlining routes, communication protocols, and contingency procedures with the mechanical precision that characterized his leadership style. The weather forecast predicted continued snowfall throughout the day, with temperatures remaining well below freezing and visibility potentially reduced to less than 50 meters during the heaviest precipitation. Morrison emphasized the importance of maintaining proper spacing between vehicles to prevent accidents on the icy roads, while remaining close enough to provide mutual support if enemy contact occurred. As the briefing concluded and soldiers began their final preparations, Samuel took his customary position near the eastern edge of their temporary camp and began his morning prayers. The ritual had become so routine that most of his squadmates barely noticed it anymore, but on this particular morning, something felt different. Perhaps it was the intensity with which Samuel whispered his supplications, or the way his hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together, but several soldiers found themselves watching him with unusual attention. Sergeant O'Brien decided to escalate his usual commentary, calling out loudly enough for the entire unit to hear his observations about Samuel's devotional practices. "Hey everyone, come watch the preacher ask his invisible friend to keep us safe today. Maybe if we all close our eyes real tight and wish really hard, the Germans will just disappear and we can all go home for Christmas." The comment generated the expected laughter from most of the assembled soldiers, but Private Danny Murphy from rural Iowa found himself feeling uncomfortable with the intensity of O'Brien's mockery. Murphy had grown up in a deeply religious household and possessed enough respect for spiritual practices to feel uneasy about the systematic ridicule directed towards Samuel's faith. However, military hierarchy and unit cohesion prevented him from voicing any objections to a superior non-commissioned officer. Tommy Chen joined the performance by dropping to his knees and mimicking Samuel's prayer posture with exaggerated solemnity, prompting additional laughter and encouraging comments from the gathered soldiers. The radio operator's impression included whispered gibberish intended to represent Samuel's quiet prayers, accompanied by theatrical gestures toward the sky and dramatic facial expressions. The performance reached its climax when Chen suddenly opened his eyes wide and announced in broken English that he had received divine revelation about enemy tank positions. Corporal Kowalski used the opportunity to deliver another lecture about the superior effectiveness of practical preparation over spiritual practices. He pointed out that Samuel's prayers had not prevented the unit from losing 2 tanks to German anti-tank guns during their previous engagement, nor had they improved the notoriously unreliable mechanical performance of their Sherman tanks. According to Kowalski's analysis, time spent maintaining weapons and equipment would provide far more concrete benefits than appeals to supernatural intervention. Samuel completed his prayers without acknowledging the commentary or responding to the mockery surrounding him. He rose slowly from his kneeling position, brushed the snow from his uniform, and began checking his personal equipment with the same methodical attention he devoted to his spiritual practices. His Thompson submachine gun received a complete inspection, including verification of the bolt mechanism, magazine springs, and ammunition count. His field pack contained the standard complement of rations, medical supplies, and emergency equipment, all arranged according to military regulations and personal preference. The movement order came at 0600 hours, with Captain Morrison's tank taking the lead position and the remaining vehicles following at intervals of 100 meters. The column stretched nearly 2 kilometers along the narrow country road, presenting a formidable display of Allied armored power, despite the relatively small number of vehicles involved. Each Sherman tank carried a crew of 5 men, including the commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver, along with sufficient ammunition and fuel for extended operations without resupply. Samuel served as the assistant driver and bow gunner in tank number 7, commanded by Lieutenant Robert Hayes from Pennsylvania. Hayes had graduated from West Point in 1941 and possessed the theoretical knowledge and practical experience necessary for armored operations, but he lacked the combat veteran status that characterized some of his fellow officers. The lieutenant had developed a grudging respect for Samuel's mechanical abilities and steady performance under pressure, despite finding the private's religious practices somewhat excessive for military service. The tank crew included Staff Sergeant Michael Russo as gunner, Corporal William Patterson as loader, and Private First Class David Kim as driver. Russo, a veteran of the Italian campaign, possessed encyclopedic knowledge of German armor capabilities and the tactical experience to employ their 75mm gun effectively against enemy targets. Patterson had joined the unit only 6 weeks earlier, but had quickly demonstrated the physical strength and quick reflexes necessary for ammunition handling under combat conditions. Kim had immigrated from Korea and possessed the language skills necessary for communication with local civilian populations when intelligence gathering required interaction with village residents. As the column proceeded along its designated route, the soldiers settled into the familiar rhythm of armored patrol operations. The steady rumble of diesel engines, the metallic clanking of track links against road surfaces, and the occasional radio communications between vehicles created a mechanical symphony that experienced tankers found oddly comforting. The enclosed nature of tank operations limited visual contact between crew members in different vehicles, but radio discipline maintained coordination and situational awareness throughout the formation. The first indication of trouble came at approximately 0715 hours, when Captain Morrison's tank reported unusual track marks in the snow crossing their intended route of advance. The impressions appeared consistent with German tracked vehicles, specifically the distinctive herringbone pattern produced by Panzer Mark IV tank treads. The tracks seemed relatively fresh, perhaps 6 to 8 hours old, based on the accumulation of snow within the depressions and the crispness of the edges. Morrison ordered the column to halt while his crew conducted a more detailed examination of the area. Lieutenant Hayes moved his tank to an overwatch position with clear fields of observation in all directions, while the remaining vehicles dispersed to provide mutual support and prevent the formation from presenting a concentrated target for enemy anti-tank weapons. The tactical deployment reflected standard armored doctrine and the practical experience gained through months of combat operations. Samuel used the halt to observe their surroundings more carefully, noting details that might prove relevant if enemy contact occurred. The terrain consisted of gently rolling hills covered with mature hardwood forest, providing excellent concealment opportunities for defensive positions but limiting observation distances for attacking forces. The road itself ran along the floor of a shallow valley, creating natural choke points where enemy forces could establish killing zones with overlapping fields of fire. The examination of the track marks revealed additional disturbing information. The impressions indicated not just a single German tank, but potentially an entire platoon of armored vehicles that had crossed their route during the previous night. More concerning was evidence suggesting the presence of heavier vehicles, possibly including Tiger tanks, weighing 57 tons and mounting 88mm guns capable of penetrating Sherman armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Captain Morrison faced a difficult tactical decision. His orders specified avoiding decisive engagement with superior enemy forces, but the intelligence value of determining German strength and intentions in the area might justify accepting some degree of risk. The presence of heavy German armor could indicate preparations for a counterattack that would threaten other Allied units operating in the region. Alternatively, The tracks might represent a withdrawal route for German forces seeking to avoid encirclement. After consulting with his company commanders via radio, Morrison decided to proceed with the mission while maintaining heightened alert status and requesting immediate artillery support on call. The decision reflected both his confidence in the combat effectiveness of his unit and the importance of gathering intelligence about enemy capabilities in the region. The column resumed movement at 0745 hours, but with modified tactical formations designed to provide better mutual support and rapid response to enemy contact. Samuel felt an unusual sense of unease as their tank rejoined the formation and continued along the designated route. His morning prayers had included a specific supplication for divine protection during the day's operations, and he found himself repeating portions of the 23rd Psalm under his breath as they advanced through increasingly forbidding terrain. The feeling had nothing to do with fear of combat or doubt about his unit's capabilities, but rather resembled the sensation he had experienced as a child when severe weather approached the family farm. The ambush began at 0827 hours, precisely 2 kilometers beyond the point where German track marks had crossed their route. The opening volley came from concealed anti-tank gun positions established on both sides of the road, with at least 6 weapons firing simultaneously at the lead elements of the American column. The German gunners had selected their positions carefully, creating overlapping fields of fire that prevented the Sherman tanks from maneuvering out of the killing zone without exposing themselves to additional weapons. Captain Morrison's tank absorbed the first hit from an 88mm anti-tank gun, positioned 300 meters to the north of the road. The tungsten core projectile penetrated the front armor plate just below the main gun mantlet, creating a fist-sized hole that allowed superheated metal fragments to enter the fighting compartment. The resulting explosion of stored ammunition created a pillar of orange flame that reached 30 meters into the air, killing all 5 crew members instantly and eliminating the unit's command structure in the opening seconds of the engagement. Lieutenant Hayes reacted quickly to the ambush, ordering his driver to reverse course, while simultaneously directing his gunner to engage the anti-tank position that had destroyed Morrison's tank. The 75mm gun fired 3 rounds in rapid succession, but the German position had been carefully camouflaged and protected by earth berms that deflected the American shells without causing significant damage. Meanwhile, additional German guns opened fire on other tanks in the column, creating a crescendo of explosions and mechanical destruction. Samuel's tank took a direct hit from a Panzerfaust anti-tank rocket fired from close range by German infantry positioned in a roadside ditch. The shaped charge warhead penetrated the side armor behind the driver's position, killing Private Kim instantly and severely wounding Corporal Patterson. The internal explosion disabled the tank's electrical systems and started a fire in the engine compartment, forcing the surviving crew members to abandon their vehicle immediately or risk death from ammunition explosions. Lieutenant Hayes emerged from the commander's hatch first, followed by Staff Sergeant Rousseau and the wounded Patterson. Samuel assisted Patterson's evacuation before climbing out of the bow gunner's position, which had been partially blocked by debris from the rocket impact. The crew took cover behind their disabled tank, while German small arms fire erupted from multiple positions around their location, pinning them down and preventing movement towards safer terrain. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly as additional German weapons revealed themselves throughout the area. The ambush had been carefully planned and executed, with German forces occupying prepared positions that provided overlapping fields of fire and multiple escape routes. The American tank column found itself trapped in a killing zone designed to maximize casualties while minimizing German exposure to return fire. Within 15 minutes of the initial contact, 8 of the 12 Sherman tanks in the column had been destroyed or disabled by enemy anti-tank fire. The surviving vehicles attempted to maneuver out of the ambush zone, but German forces had anticipated their likely escape routes and positioned additional weapons to cover those areas. The sound of diesel engines mixing with explosions, small arms fire, and the screams of wounded soldiers created a chaotic symphony that marked the destruction of an entire armored unit. Samuel found himself separated from his crew members during the initial confusion following their tank's destruction. German infantry had advanced under cover of the artillery bombardment, forcing the American survivors to disperse among the rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation that characterized the area. The snow that had seemed so peaceful earlier in the morning now provided the only concealment available to prevent detection by enemy forces systematically searching for survivors. The private discovered a shallow depression approximately 50 meters from the road, partially concealed by fallen logs and accumulated snowdrifts. The position provided limited protection from small arms fire while offering observation of the surrounding area. But Samuel realized that discovery was inevitable once German forces completed their sweep of the ambush site. The sound of approaching voices speaking German indicated that enemy soldiers were conducting a methodical search for survivors. As the voices grew closer, Samuel faced the same choice that confronted every soldier in desperate circumstances: surrender and hope for treatment according to international conventions, attempt to escape and evade capture, or prepare for a final confrontation with whatever weapons remained available. His Thompson submachine gun contained a full magazine of 30 rounds, supplemented by 2 additional magazines in his equipment belt, providing sufficient ammunition for sustained resistance but insufficient firepower to significantly affect the tactical situation. Instead of choosing any of those conventional options, Samuel did something that surprised even himself. He closed his eyes, placed his hands together, and began to pray with the same quiet intensity that had characterized his morning devotions. The words of the 23rd Psalm seemed to flow naturally from his lips despite the chaos surrounding him, and he found himself feeling an unexpected sense of peace in the midst of the most dangerous situation he had ever encountered. The prayer was interrupted by the appearance of a German soldier, who discovered Samuel's position while conducting a systematic search of the area. The enemy soldier, a young man who appeared no older than 18 or 19 years of age, raised his rifle and shouted commands in German while gesturing for Samuel to stand with his hands raised. The American private complied slowly, maintaining eye contact with his captor while continuing to move his lips in silent prayer. What happened next would be recounted by witnesses on both sides for decades after the conflict ended. As the German soldier prepared to march Samuel toward a collection point where other prisoners were being assembled, a massive artillery barrage erupted across the entire ambush site. American forces had finally responded to the distress calls from Morrison's unit, and multiple batteries of 105mm howitzers were delivering concentrated fire on German positions throughout the area. The first shells impacted less than 100 meters from Samuel's location, creating enormous explosions that threw both men to the ground and showered them with dirt, rocks, and shrapnel. The young German soldier was struck in the head by a fragment of metal and killed instantly, while Samuel found himself miraculously unharmed despite lying in the open during one of the most intense bombardments of his military service. The artillery continued for 37 minutes, with American guns firing over 800 rounds into the relatively small area where German forces had established their ambush positions. The bombardment was guided by surviving members of Morrison's unit, who had managed to reach radio equipment in one of the damaged tanks and provide target corrections to the artillery batteries. The intensity of the fire was sufficient to neutralize most German positions and force the surviving enemy forces to withdraw from the area. When the shelling finally ceased, Samuel found himself alone among the smoldering ruins of what had been a carefully prepared German defensive position. The landscape had been transformed into a moon-like surface of craters, destroyed equipment, and scattered debris that bore no resemblance to the peaceful countryside that had existed an hour earlier. The silence that followed the bombardment seemed almost supernatural after the extended period of explosions and mechanical destruction. Samuel slowly made his way back toward the road where his unit had been ambushed, calling out identification signals to avoid being mistaken for an enemy soldier by any surviving Americans in the area. The scene that greeted him defied comprehension, even for a soldier who had witnessed months of combat operations. 12 Sherman tanks lay scattered along nearly 2 kilometers of road, most of them reduced to burned-out hulks that barely resembled their original configuration. The human cost of the ambush was even more devastating than the material losses. Of the 47 soldiers who had begun the morning patrol with such confidence, only 11 had survived the German attack and subsequent artillery bombardment. Most of the survivors had sustained wounds ranging from minor shrapnel cuts to serious injuries requiring immediate medical evacuation. The unit had effectively ceased to exist as a combat-effective formation within the span of a single morning. Lieutenant Hayes had survived the destruction of their tank, but suffered severe burns on his hands and face from the engine fire that followed the Panzerfaust impact. Staff Sergeant Russo had been wounded by shrapnel during the evacuation, but retained enough mobility to assist other injured soldiers. Corporal Patterson's wounds proved more serious, requiring immediate medical attention to prevent life-threatening complications from internal bleeding. As Samuel moved among the survivors, providing what assistance he could, and helping to establish a defensive perimeter until rescue forces arrived, he began to comprehend the magnitude of what had occurred. Every soldier who had mocked his morning prayers was dead, killed either in the initial ambush or during the artillery bombardment that followed. Every man who had ridiculed his faith had perished. While he remained unharmed despite having been in the most exposed position during both phases of the engagement, the realization was not one of triumph or vindication, but rather of profound sadness for the loss of comrades who had shared the dangers and hardships of military service. Samuel had never wished harm to any member of his unit, despite their constant mockery of his religious practices. The deaths of Sergeant O'Brien, Private Chen, and Corporal Kowalski represented the loss of experienced soldiers and fellow human beings, not the justification of his spiritual beliefs over their skepticism. Rescue forces from the 5th Armored Division arrived at 14:30 hours, bringing medical personnel, recovery equipment, and fresh troops to secure the area against possible German counterattacks. The medical teams worked quickly to stabilize the wounded survivors and prepare them for evacuation to field hospitals located several kilometers behind the front lines. The recovery crews began the grim task of removing bodies from destroyed vehicles and preparing detailed reports about the equipment losses. Colonel William Thompson, commanding officer of the 5th Armored Division, personally conducted the initial investigation into the circumstances surrounding the destruction of the 761st Tank Battalion. Thompson was a West Point graduate with extensive combat experience, who understood the importance of learning tactical lessons from both successful operations and devastating defeats. His preliminary interviews with survivors revealed the systematic nature of the German ambush and the effectiveness of their coordination between anti-tank weapons, infantry, and artillery support. During his interview with Samuel, Colonel Thompson was struck by the private's calm demeanor and detailed recollection of events despite having experienced one of the most traumatic situations possible in combat. Samuel provided precise descriptions of German weapons positions, enemy force composition, and tactical procedures that proved invaluable for intelligence analysis and future operational planning. More importantly, his account included information about German withdrawal routes that enabled Allied forces to intercept and engage enemy units before they could establish new defensive positions. The colonel's report on the engagement noted Samuel's exceptional performance during and after the ambush, particularly his ability to maintain situational awareness and provide assistance to wounded comrades despite the chaos surrounding him. Thompson recommended Samuel for promotion to corporal and assignment to a reconnaissance unit, where his demonstrated courage and observational skills could be employed more effectively. The recommendation also included citation for the Bronze Star Medal in recognition of his actions during the rescue and evacuation of wounded soldiers. Samuel's response to the commendation recommendation surprised Colonel Thompson. The private requested that any recognition for his actions be shared equally among all members of his original unit, including those who had been lost during the ambush. He explained that their deaths had occurred in service to their country and their fellow soldiers, making them worthy of honor regardless of their personal beliefs or attitudes toward his religious practices. The request led to an extended conversation between Thompson and Samuel about the nature of military service, the role of faith in combat situations, and the importance of unit cohesion in achieving mission success. The colonel, who had lost many good soldiers during his own combat service, found Samuel's perspective both unusual and compelling. Most soldiers who survived when their comrades perished experienced guilt, anger, or other emotional responses that required professional counseling and extended recovery periods. Samuel explained that his survival was not a matter of divine favoritism or superior virtue, but rather represented an opportunity to honor the memory of his fallen comrades through continued service and dedication to the values they had all sworn to defend. His morning prayers would continue to include specific supplications for the souls of O'Brien, Chen, Kowalski, and every other member of the 761st who had died in the ambush. Their sacrifice would be remembered and honored, regardless of their personal attitudes toward his faith. The investigation into the ambush revealed that German forces had been conducting a systematic withdrawal from advanced positions while simultaneously preparing defensive actions designed to delay Allied pursuit and inflict maximum casualties on pursuing units. The attack on Morrison's column represented part of a larger tactical plan that included similar ambushes conducted against other American units operating in the region. Intelligence analysts estimated that German forces had destroyed or damaged over 60 Allied vehicles during a coordinated series of engagements conducted throughout the Ardennes sector. Samuel was reassigned to the 4th Reconnaissance Squadron, following his recovery from minor injuries sustained during the ambush. His new duties included operating behind enemy lines to gather intelligence about German troop movements, defensive preparations, and logistical capabilities. The assignment required soldiers with exceptional observational skills, physical endurance, and the mental toughness necessary to operate in small groups with minimal support for extended periods. The Reconnaissance Squadron's commanding officer, Major Charles Anderson, had specifically requested Samuel's assignment based on Colonel Thompson's recommendation and reports from other officers who had observed his performance during the weeks following the ambush. Anderson needed soldiers who could maintain effectiveness under extreme stress while working independently or in small groups behind enemy lines. Samuel's demonstrated ability to remain calm and focused during crisis situations made him ideal for reconnaissance operations. Samuel's first mission with the 4th Reconnaissance Squadron involved a 2-week operation to establish observation posts along German supply routes connecting their forward positions with rear area depots and maintenance facilities. The mission required infiltrating through enemy territory, establishing concealed positions, and maintaining radio contact with Allied headquarters while reporting detailed information about German activities. The work was dangerous, requiring constant vigilance and the ability to remain motionless for hours while enemy patrols passed within meters of hidden observation posts. The assignment also provided Samuel with opportunities to demonstrate that his religious faith enhanced rather than hindered his military effectiveness. His daily prayer routine continued regardless of operational circumstances, but now included specific requests for guidance in gathering accurate intelligence and avoiding detection by enemy forces. The discipline required for maintaining spiritual practices under extreme stress translated directly into the self-control necessary for successful reconnaissance operations. During his 3rd mission with the Reconnaissance Squadron, Samuel's observation post provided early warning of a major German offensive that allowed Allied forces to reposition their defensive lines and concentrate artillery fire on enemy assembly areas. The intelligence prevented what could have been a successful enemy breakthrough that might have resulted in hundreds of Allied casualties and the loss of strategically important terrain. Samuel's detailed reports about German force composition, equipment capabilities, and tactical procedures enabled defensive commanders to deploy their limited resources most effectively. Major Anderson noted in his efficiency reports that Samuel possessed an almost supernatural ability to remain undetected while conducting observations in areas where other reconnaissance soldiers had been discovered and captured by enemy patrols. The Major attributed this success to Samuel's exceptional patience, attention to detail, and ability to remain motionless for extended periods while maintaining constant vigilance. Anderson was unaware that Samuel spent much of his observation time in silent prayer, asking for divine protection while fulfilling his military duties. The Reconnaissance Squadron's operations continued throughout the winter of 1944 and into the spring of 1945. with Samuel participating in dozens of missions that provided crucial intelligence for Allied tactical and strategic planning. His reports contributed to the successful defense of key positions, the identification of German supply vulnerabilities, and the development of effective countermeasures against enemy tactics. The cumulative value of his intelligence-gathering efforts was recognized through promotion to sergeant and award of the Silver Star Medal for gallantry in action. Samuel's reputation within the reconnaissance squadron extended beyond his professional competence to include his role as an informal counselor and source of encouragement for other soldiers struggling with the psychological pressures of combat operations. His quiet faith and consistent moral example provided stability for unit members dealing with fear, guilt, or despair resulting from their experiences in combat. Soldiers who had initially viewed his religious practices with skepticism began seeking his advice about personal problems and moral dilemmas. The transformation in attitudes towards Samuel's faith became particularly evident during a mission in March 1945, when his reconnaissance patrol was trapped behind German lines for 6 days without food or adequate water. While other patrol members struggled with despair and desperation, Samuel maintained his prayer schedule and shared his remaining rations with soldiers whose supplies had been lost during their initial infiltration. His calm leadership and unwavering confidence in eventual rescue provided the psychological support necessary for the patrol to maintain discipline and tactical effectiveness until relief forces located their position. The rescue operation required coordinated action by Allied infantry, armor, and artillery units to penetrate German defenses and extract the reconnaissance patrol from their surrounded position. Samuel's detailed knowledge of German defensive positions, gained through careful observation during their period of entrapment, enabled the rescue forces to avoid enemy strongpoints and minimize casualties during the extraction operation. His information about German troop movements also contributed to a successful Allied attack that eliminated an entire German company and captured valuable intelligence documents. Following the successful rescue operation, Major Anderson submitted a recommendation for Samuel's promotion to Staff Sergeant and assignment as a reconnaissance platoon leader. The recommendation cited his exceptional leadership abilities, tactical knowledge, and positive influence on unit morale as justification for increased responsibility and authority. Anderson noted that Samuel's religious faith, rather than being a liability or source of division, had proven to be a source of strength that benefited the entire unit. Samuel's promotion ceremony took place on April 20, 1945, exactly 4 months after the ambush that had destroyed his original tank unit and killed most of his comrades. The ceremony included presentation of his Silver Star Medal and formal recognition of his contributions to Allied intelligence-gathering efforts throughout the winter campaign. Colonel Thompson, who had conducted the original investigation into the ambush, attended the ceremony and delivered remarks about the importance of moral courage and personal integrity in military service. During his remarks at the promotion ceremony, Samuel spoke briefly about the soldiers who had died in the December ambush and his ongoing commitment to honoring their memory through continued service. He noted that their sacrifice had made possible his survival and subsequent opportunities to contribute to Allied success in the European theater. His comments avoided any reference to divine intervention or supernatural protection, focusing instead on the responsibilities that survival had placed upon him. The European conflict ended 3 weeks later with Germany's unconditional surrender, marking the conclusion of nearly 4 years of combat operations that had cost millions of lives and transformed the political landscape of an entire continent. Samuel's reconnaissance squadron received orders to maintain observation of former German military units during the initial phases of occupation and reconstruction, ensuring compliance with surrender terms and preventing any attempts to organize resistance movements. Samuel remained in Europe for 14 months following the end of hostilities, serving with occupation forces responsible for maintaining order and assisting in the massive logistical effort required to repatriate millions of displaced persons and former prisoners of war. His duties included liaison work with local civilian authorities, supervision of former German military personnel engaged in reconstruction projects, and intelligence gathering related to potential security threats in the occupied territories. The extended service in Europe provided Samuel with opportunities to observe the human cost of the conflict beyond its immediate military dimensions. He witnessed the devastation wrought upon civilian populations, the challenges facing refugees attempting to rebuild their lives, and the complex moral questions surrounding justice and reconciliation in the aftermath of systematic atrocities. The experience deepened his understanding of his own survival and the responsibilities that accompanied it. Samuel's final assignment before returning to the United States involved serving as an instructor at a training facility established to prepare American soldiers for occupation duties in Germany and Austria. His curriculum included tactical procedures for reconnaissance operations, techniques for operating behind enemy lines, and leadership principles derived from his combat experience. The position allowed him to share his knowledge with soldiers who would continue the mission of maintaining security and stability in occupied territories. During his service as an instructor, Samuel developed a reputation for emphasizing the importance of treating all individuals with dignity and respect, regardless of their nationality, background, or previous affiliations. His approach to training reflected his belief that moral integrity was essential for effective military service, and that soldiers who maintained high ethical standards would prove more successful in accomplishing their missions than those who relied solely on technical competence or superior firepower. Samuel returned to the United States in September 1946, receiving an honorable discharge and veteran benefits that enabled him to pursue educational opportunities previously unavailable to members of his family. He enrolled at Tuskegee Institute, where he studied agricultural science and mechanical engineering while maintaining the same disciplined approach to daily prayer that had characterized his military service. His fellow students, many of whom were also combat veterans, respected his religious commitment and sought his advice on adapting to civilian life. The transition to civilian life proved challenging for many combat veterans, particularly those who had experienced traumatic events or lost close friends during military service. Samuel found that his religious faith provided continuity between his military and civilian experiences, enabling him to process his wartime memories while focusing on constructive goals for the future. His daily prayer routine continued to include specific supplications for the souls of his fallen comrades and gratitude for his own survival and opportunities for service. Samuel's academic performance at Tuskegee reflected the same attention to detail and disciplined approach that had characterized his military service. He graduated with honors in 1950, earning degrees in both agricultural science and mechanical engineering that qualified him for positions with major corporations or government agencies. However, his career choice reflected his ongoing commitment to service and his desire to contribute to the welfare of communities that had been underserved by traditional educational and economic systems. Following graduation, Samuel accepted a position with the Department of Agriculture, where his responsibilities included developing and implementing programs designed to improve farming techniques and agricultural productivity in rural communities throughout the southeastern United States. The work required extensive travel and interaction with farmers who faced significant economic challenges, resulting from changes in agricultural technology and market conditions. Samuel's ability to communicate effectively with people from diverse backgrounds proved invaluable in gaining acceptance for new approaches and technologies. Samuel's agricultural extension work provided opportunities to apply the leadership skills and problem-solving abilities developed during his military service to civilian challenges that required patience, diplomacy, and technical expertise. His success in helping farming communities adapt to changing economic conditions earned recognition from both government officials and the farmers who benefited from his programs. The work also allowed him to contribute directly to increasing food production during a period when global population growth was straining agricultural resources. Throughout his civilian career, Samuel maintained regular correspondence with surviving members of his military units and attended annual reunions that provided opportunities to honor the memory of soldiers who had died during the conflict. These gatherings included formal memorial services, informal discussions about shared experiences, and efforts to support veterans who continued to struggle with physical or psychological injuries resulting from their military service. The reunions also provided forums for reflecting on the significance of events that had seemed chaotic and meaningless during the immediate experience of combat operations. Samuel often spoke about the December ambush and its aftermath, noting that his survival had enabled him to contribute to military success during the final months of the conflict and to serve his country and community during the post-war period. His perspective emphasized gratitude and responsibility rather than divine favoritism or superior virtue. Samuel married in 1952, beginning a family life that reflected the same values and disciplinary approaches that had characterized his military and professional service. His wife, Dorothy, was a teacher who shared his commitment to education and community service. Their 3 children grew up hearing stories about their father's military service, but always within the context of broader lessons about integrity, service, and the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect. The family's daily routine included morning prayers that followed the same basic patterns Samuel had maintained since his military service, though adapted for family participation and civilian circumstances. The practice provided continuity between his wartime experiences and his roles as husband, father, and community member. His children learned to view prayer not as superstition or weakness, but as a source of strength and guidance for meeting life's challenges with courage and integrity. Samuel's career with the Department of Agriculture continued for 31 years, during which he developed innovative programs that helped thousands of farming families improve their economic situations while contributing to increased agricultural productivity. His work included research into crop rotation techniques, soil conservation methods, and the integration of new technologies with traditional farming practices. The success of his programs earned recognition through numerous professional awards and invitations to speak at national conferences on agricultural development. Retirement in 1981 provided Samuel with opportunities to reflect more extensively on his military service and its continuing influence on his life and worldview. He began writing detailed memoirs about his experiences during the Second World War, focusing particularly on the events of December 15, 1944, and their significance for his understanding of faith, service, and survival. The project required extensive research into military records and interviews with other veterans to ensure accuracy and completeness. The memoir project also involved correspondence with families of soldiers who had died during the ambush, providing them with detailed accounts of their relatives' service and sacrifice. Samuel felt a particular responsibility to ensure that the memory of his fallen comrades was preserved and honored, regardless of their attitudes toward his religious practices. The letters he wrote to grieving families emphasized the courage and dedication that all members of his unit had displayed in service to their country. Samuel's memoirs were published in 1985 as a contribution to historical understanding of the African-American military experience during World War II. The book received favorable reviews from military historians and religious scholars who appreciated its honest exploration of the relationship between faith and military service. The work avoided sensationalism or claims of divine intervention, focusing instead on the practical ways that spiritual discipline enhanced rather than hindered military effectiveness. The publication of his memoirs led to speaking engagements at military installations, religious institutions, and educational conferences where Samuel shared his perspectives on leadership, faith, and service with diverse audiences. His presentations emphasized universal principles of integrity, courage, and dedication that transcended specific religious beliefs or cultural backgrounds. The positive reception of these presentations reflected growing recognition of the complex relationships between spirituality and professional effectiveness in high-stress environments. Samuel's speaking engagements included annual presentations at military academies, where he addressed future officers about the importance of moral leadership and personal integrity in command positions. His remarks emphasized that effective military leaders must be prepared to make difficult decisions under extreme stress, while maintaining their ethical principles and concern for the welfare of their subordinates. The combination of his combat experience and civilian achievements provided credibility for addressing these challenging topics. During one particularly memorable presentation at West Point in 1987, Samuel was asked by a cadet whether he believed that divine intervention had saved his life during the December 1944 ambush. His response reflected decades of careful reflection about the relationship between faith and survival in combat situations. He explained that his survival had been the result of multiple factors, including tactical positioning, enemy targeting priorities, and pure chance, but that his faith had provided the mental discipline and emotional stability necessary to respond effectively to extreme danger. Samuel's response continued by noting that many deeply religious soldiers had died during the conflict, while many skeptics and atheists had survived to make valuable contributions during the post-war period. He suggested that divine protection, if it existed, operated according to principles that exceeded human understanding, and that survival carried responsibilities rather than privileges. The most important lesson from his experience was not about the superiority of faith over skepticism, but about the importance of maintaining moral integrity regardless of external circumstances. The West Point presentation concluded with Samuel's observation that military service provided opportunities for personal growth and character development that were difficult to find in civilian life. The extreme challenges of combat operations revealed both strengths and weaknesses that might remain hidden under normal circumstances. Soldiers who used these revelations constructively could become more effective leaders and more complete human beings, while those who allowed traumatic experiences to overwhelm them might struggle with lifelong difficulties. Samuel continued his speaking and writing activities throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, contributing to historical conferences, veterans organizations, and educational institutions interested in preserving the memory of World War II and understanding its continuing significance for contemporary society. His presentations and published articles consistently emphasized themes of service, integrity, and the importance of learning from both success and failure in challenging circumstances. Samuel's final major project involved contributing to the development of an exhibit at the National Museum of African American History and Culture that documented the experiences of black soldiers during World War II. The exhibit included artifacts from his military service, excerpts from his memoir, and video recordings of interviews about his experiences. The project provided opportunities to place his individual story within the broader context of African American military service and the social changes that followed the conflict. The museum exhibit opened in 1993, coinciding with the 50th anniversary of major American military operations in Europe. Samuel attended the opening ceremony, where he was recognized along with other veterans who had contributed to the project. His remarks at the ceremony emphasized the collective nature of military service and the importance of remembering all who had served, regardless of their backgrounds or personal beliefs. Samuel's health began declining in the mid-1990s, but he continued his morning prayer routine with the same dedication that had characterized his military service 5 decades earlier. His prayers continued to include specific supplications for the souls of his fallen comrades and gratitude for opportunities to serve his country and community throughout his civilian life. The consistency of this practice provided stability and meaning during the challenges of aging and declining physical capabilities. Dorothy's death in 1997 marked a difficult transition for Samuel, who had relied on her companionship and support for 45 years of marriage. However, his established spiritual practices and long-term perspective on mortality enabled him to process his grief constructively while maintaining his commitments to family, community, and the memory of his military service. His children and grandchildren provided emotional support while respecting his independent approach to managing personal challenges. Samuel's final years included continued involvement in veterans organizations and occasional speaking engagements when his health permitted travel and public appearances. His last major presentation occurred in 1999 at a conference on military leadership held at the Army War College, where he addressed senior officers about the relationship between personal character and professional effectiveness in command positions. The presentation received a standing ovation from an audience that included generals who had served during the Vietnam conflict and subsequent military operations. The presentation at the Army War College included Samuel's reflections on the evolution of military service since World War II and the continuing importance of moral leadership in an era of technological advancement and changing social conditions. He noted that modern soldiers faced many of the same fundamental challenges that had confronted his generation, particularly the need to maintain integrity and humanity, while engaging in activities that required calculated violence and systematic destruction of enemy capabilities. Samuel's final public appearance occurred at a Veterans Day ceremony in 2001, where he delivered remarks about the significance of military service for both individual development and national security. His presentation emphasized that freedom required constant vigilance and that each generation of citizens bore responsibility for preserving the values and institutions that previous generations had defended through military service. The remarks reflected both his personal experience and his observation of national and international developments during the 56 years since his own military service. Samuel died peacefully in his sleep on December 15, 2003, exactly 59 years after the ambush that had claimed the lives of most of his original tank unit. His death occurred at his home, surrounded by family members who had gathered to celebrate his 81st birthday. The timing seemed somehow appropriate for a man whose life had been fundamentally shaped by events that occurred on the same date 6 decades earlier. The funeral service reflected Samuel's military service and civilian achievements, while honoring the religious faith that had sustained him throughout his life. The ceremony included military honors provided by an honor guard from the local Army Reserve unit, presentation of a folded American flag to his family, and eulogies that emphasized his contributions to military service, agricultural development, and community leadership. Representatives from veterans organizations, agricultural associations, and religious institutions attended to pay their respects. Samuel's grave marker included his military decorations and dates of service, along with a biblical quotation from the 23rd Psalm that had sustained him during his morning prayers for over 60 years. The inscription reflected both his military service and his personal faith, while avoiding any suggestion that his survival had resulted from divine favoritism or supernatural intervention. The memorial emphasized service, integrity, and gratitude rather than privilege or special protection. The legacy of Samuel's life extended beyond his individual achievements to include the principles and values that he had consistently demonstrated throughout his military and civilian careers. His example provided evidence that religious faith could enhance rather than hinder professional effectiveness, particularly in challenging circumstances that required moral courage and personal integrity. His approach to military service demonstrated that spiritual discipline could contribute to tactical effectiveness and leadership capabilities. Samuel's story also illustrated the importance of maintaining perspective and humility when confronting traumatic experiences and apparent injustices. His response to surviving when his comrades perished emphasized responsibility and service rather than self-congratulation or claims of special virtue. His treatment of those who had mocked his religious practices reflected forgiveness and understanding rather than vindication or revenge. The broader significance of Samuel's experience during World War II related to the complex relationships between individual faith, military effectiveness, and survival in combat situations. His story demonstrated that religious practices could provide mental discipline and emotional stability that enhanced rather than compromised military performance. The mockery he endured from fellow soldiers reflected common misconceptions about the relationship between spirituality and practical effectiveness in demanding professional environments. Samuel's post-war career in agricultural development illustrated the transferability of skills and character traits developed during military service to civilian challenges requiring leadership, technical expertise, and interpersonal effectiveness. His success in helping farming communities adapt to changing economic and technological conditions reflected the same problem-solving abilities and persistence that had characterized his military service. The connection between his wartime experiences and civilian achievements provided evidence for the value of military service as preparation for leadership responsibilities in diverse fields. The continuing relevance of Samuel's story for contemporary military and civilian leaders related to the timeless importance of moral integrity, personal discipline, and service to others as foundations for effective leadership. His example demonstrated that individuals who maintained high ethical standards while developing technical competence could achieve exceptional results in challenging circumstances. The combination of spiritual practice, professional dedication, and personal humility that characterized his approach to life and work provided a model for others facing difficult responsibilities in complex environments. Samuel's influence extended through the students he taught, the farmers he advised, the veterans he counseled, and the family members who inherited his values and perspectives. His published memoir and recorded interviews preserved his insights for future generations, interested in understanding the relationship between personal character and professional effectiveness. The museum exhibits and educational programs that featured his story contributed to broader understanding of African American military service and the continuing significance of World War II for American society. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.